The hills of California shimmered under a golden sun, but that beauty carried a warning. In 1846, strangers began arriving with promises of gold and new beginnings. They came with hunger in their hearts and rifles on their shoulders. For the Yuki, Pomo, Wintu, and Miwok tribes, the earth itself began to tremble beneath unfamiliar boots. The land that once sang with ancestral voices grew silent, sensing the storm to come. They could feel it, the weight of destiny turning cruel, the scent of greed cutting through the wind. John C. Fremont's expedition pushed through mountain passes and river valleys, charting what settlers would soon call opportunity. Behind every trail blazed, a village vanished. The Maidu and Karuk watched strangers carve lines through sacred soil. Fremont's men claimed exploration. The tribes saw invasion. The maps they drew erased lives. Each campsite left ashes over forgotten graves. In the distance, the Hoopa prayed for balance, unaware that this imbalance would soon engulf the entire land. When Peter Hardeman Burnett became California's first governor, his words chilled the hearts of all who listened. He declared, "A war of extermination will continue until the Indian race becomes extinct." To him, this was policy. To the tribes, prophecy. Across the valleys, chiefs gathered in silence, their breath steady, their eyes dark with disbelief. Chief Lassic of the Eel River tribes whispered to his people, "They mean to erase us." The sun set red that night, as if in mourning for what was about to begin. The 1848 gold rush swept across California like wildfire. Rivers turned to mud. Forests echoed with axes and shouts. Prospectors flooded sacred lands, tearing through riverbeds where Pomo children once played. Gold meant death for the tribes, hunger, disease, displacement. The Miwok watched as their fishing grounds filled with miners' waste. What settlers called fortune, the Indigenous called loss. Beneath the gleam of gold lay bones of the innocent, buried under greed's shadow. The state began paying bounties for native lives. Soldiers, ranchers, and vigilantes formed militias. Men like Walter S. Jarboe led the Eel River Rangers. They rode into valleys shouting victory songs while slaughtering families. Each scalp was currency. The Yuki fought back, spears against rifles, courage against cruelty. But courage alone could not stop the tide. The earth soaked their blood, and the rivers carried it downstream, whispering their names forever. May 15th, 1850. Clear Lake shimmered in morning light. Pomo men, women, and children huddled on Bloody Island, believing the soldiers would show mercy. Instead, volleys of gunfire ripped through the mist. Chief Augustine stood among chaos, watching friends fall into the water. The lake turned crimson. Some dove beneath, holding breath until silence returned. Augustine rose from the reeds later, his face pale with rage and heartbreak. The sky itself seemed to weep. To the north, Chief Lame Bill and the Wintu people braced against invasion. Their fields burned, their granaries emptied. Soldiers called it conquest. The Wintu called it survival. Families fled into the mountains, hiding children beneath thick pine roots. Each sunrise was both a blessing and a threat. Lame Bill told his warriors, "Even if the world forgets us, the rivers will remember our names." Their courage was their only weapon, their love for the land their only shield. The Karuk and Hoopa tribes soon faced starvation. Soldiers seized their food, destroyed their villages, and enslaved survivors to dig ditches and haul timber. Mothers carried infants while working under the whip. Nights echoed with silent cries, grief too deep for words. They buried their dead beneath the roots of redwoods, hoping the trees would protect their souls. The forest grew heavier, its silence a witness to crimes that the world would deny. Serenus Clinton Hastings and other wealthy settlers profited from confiscated indigenous lands. Paper deeds turned rivers and meadows into property lines. The Nomlaki and Yana watched strangers measure their sacred spaces, fencing off spirits older than time. Every tree marked private was once a family's home. The legal language of ownership became another weapon. The people were pushed to the margins, their voices drowned by the rustle of parchment and coins. In 1863, 461 Maidu were forced from their homes and marched to Round Valley Reservation. Only 277 survived. Children fell by the roadside, elders left behind. Chief Waki Jack of the Yuki wept as he saw them pass, proof that California's beauty had become a graveyard. The Maidu's song of sorrow carried through the wind, a hymn for endurance. Though bodies broke, spirits endured. Each step, each tear became testimony. We are still here. Far north, the Tolowa people gathered at Untold for ceremony, drums echoing, fires dancing. Then came the settlers, rifles gleaming in dawn light. Within hours, hundreds lay lifeless. The survivors hid among the ashes of their village. The smell of blood lingered longer than the smoke. What had been a sacred gathering became another silent graveyard. The wind carried the cries to the ocean, and the waves mourned the fallen. As laws legalized forced servitude, Native children were apprenticed into white homes, another word for slavery. Boys labored in fields, girls became maids. Families wept as strangers rode away with their little ones. The Yokuts people sang lullabies to the stars, hoping their children would hear them somewhere far away. In the cities, laughter echoed from children who no longer knew their true names. A Maidu willow once bent near a stream where elders gathered for stories. Settlers cut it down to build a fence. The tribes watched as their roots, physical and spiritual, were ripped from the earth. The Esalen near the coast buried feathers at the ocean's edge, whispering to the spirits of the trees, "We will return." The wind carried their words over the waves, but no answer came. By 1870, California's indigenous population had plummeted from nearly 150,000 to fewer than 30,000. Rivers ran clear but carried memories of suffering. Chief Lassic wandered the Eel River Valley, his people gone, his songs fading. Yet he still spoke to the water as though it could speak back. "Remember us," he said. "Tell the future who we were." The current whispered softly, "I will." Charles Stone and George McKinstry owned indigenous laborers as property. The contract spoke of service, but they were soaked in pain. Chief Augustine, now older, stood by Clear Lake again, his reflection wrinkled by the ripples. "We worked their land," he murmured, "but our sweat bought us nothing." In his eyes burned quiet defiance, a refusal to let dignity die even when freedom was stolen. For the Achomawi, the rivers were once sacred arteries of life, teeming with salmon, laughter, and songs. Now the same rivers reflected despair. A young mother cradled her baby under a dying tree, whispering stories of a time before hunger. "You were born from this land," she said, "and this land will someday welcome you home." The child smiled, hope flickering in the ruins. In 1846, Fremont's men opened fire on the Wintu along the Sacramento River. It was swift and senseless. Chief Lame Bill watched the river turn red. The cries of the wounded mixed with the rush of water. That night, survivors built small fires and vowed revenge. "They may take our lives," Lame Bill whispered, "but not our stories." The stars blinked as if in solemn agreement. The Karuk and Hoopa fled deeper into the forests. They lived off bark and roots, raising children beneath the shadow of redwoods. Hunger stalked them, yet their songs survived. Mothers hummed melodies that spoke of courage. Fathers whispered prayers to trees that once sheltered generations. "You will not forget us," they said to the forest. And the forest listened. The state began paying soldiers and civilians for Indian scalps. Men turned killing into a profession. Chief Waki Jack watched his warriors fall one by one. In his hands, the soil was warm with blood. He pressed it to his chest and swore, "Our spirit will not die in your coins." The bounty hunters rode away with money. The Yuki rode away with unbroken pride. The Pomo gathered at Clear Lake for peace. Dawn broke calm and silent, but soldiers came with fury. Gunfire echoed across the water. Chief Augustine held a wounded child and screamed into the smoke, "Why?" The lake reflected his pain, its surface painted crimson. When silence fell, the only sound left was the whisper of waves against bodies, a lullaby for the dead. Between 1856 and 1859, the Yuki faced extermination at Round Valley. Over 1,000 perished. Chief Waki Jack, once defiant, now stood hollow-eyed among the survivors. The air stank of gunpowder and grief. Yet, as the last fires died, he looked up and said, "The land still breathes. So shall we." His words carried through the valley like a ghost refusing to fade. The Nomlaki and Yana had long found refuge in the forest, but even trees could not hide them forever. Soldiers tracked them by footprints, burning the groves that sheltered them. A young woman named Nomi sang as she ran, her song a cry to the spirits. When she fell, the forest echoed her final note. The wind carried it to the mountains, refusing silence. The Maidu were forced to march under armed guard through dust and sorrow. Mothers carried the bones of their children in small bundles of cloth. Chief Lame Bill watched from a hillside, his fists clenched. "They take our bodies," he said softly, "but never our souls." The mountains echoed back his vow. Even the soldiers felt the weight of his eyes. At night, Tolowa villages lit up the horizon, not from celebration, but fire. Settlers burned homes, laughter, and history in one blaze. Women clutched babies and ran to the sea. Behind them, flames devoured generations. Yet among the ashes, one elder knelt, drawing circles in the dirt. "We return like the tide," she said, "and even fire cannot stop the ocean." In Sacramento, Peter Burnett smiled over new laws. On paper, Indigenous lives were made property. The words were neat, the intent monstrous. Far from the city, a Pomo woman held her infant under the stars, whispering, "You are free, not because of their words, but because you were born from the earth." Her lullaby was defiance, sung softly into eternity. The Miwok watched their once fertile valley drown in dust. Rivers ran dry under the weight of mining. The air turned heavy with silence. An elder stood alone, dipping his hand into the last puddle of clear water. "This was our mirror," he said. "Now it shows us only strangers." He wept quietly for both the past and what little future remained. In the Eel River Valley, Chief Lassic refused surrender. His people surrounded, his warriors exhausted. He raised his spear under a dying sun. "If they call us beasts," he said, "then let them remember how beasts fight for their young." The gunfire came swift. By dawn his village was gone, but his name lived, whispered among the canyons as the chief who fought to the very end. Under the oak trees, young Yokot's warriors planned silent raids. They moved like wind, striking and disappearing into night. For every stolen child, they took back dignity. Their faces painted in ash, they swore to protect what remained. Even as the settlers built fences, the Yokots reminded the land, "You cannot be owned." The Esalen stood by the ocean, their reflections fading with each tide. The waves carried memories of children lost to mission chains. One old woman whispered to the horizon, "If the sea remembers us, we will never die." The wind answered softly, brushing her hair like an old friend. Somewhere deep within the waves, the ancestors stirred. Under the guard of soldiers, hundreds were marched across barren lands toward unknown camps. Each mile claimed the weak. a Maidu elder collapsed and kissed the earth before dying. Chief Waki Jack walked behind, whispering a prayer. "Let this soil remember our footprints," he said, "for someday our children will follow them home." In 1860, as the Miwok people prepared for ceremony on Indian Island, settlers came at night. They struck while drums still beat. By sunrise, over 200 lay dead. The bay was still, the gulls circling in eerie quiet. The survivors sang their mourning song to the ocean, and the sea, ever loyal, sang it back. In the north, the Shasta lived in the shadows of mountains that once sang with life. But now, the peaks only echoed silence. A young boy looked up at the stars and asked his mother, "Will they hear us in the sky?" She smiled through tears. "Yes, my son. The stars remember everything." The Maidu huddled in caves as winter tore through the valley. Hunger gnawed at them, but grief hurt worse. Chief Lame Bill stared at the snow, whispering to ancestors. "We are still breathing," he said. "That must mean something." The cold carried his words across the frozen hills, and for a brief moment, even the wind paused to listen. By 1873, the worst had passed, but the damage endured. The tribes that remained were scattered and scarred. Chiefs gathered in silence, their eyes tired yet unbroken. "We are the shadow of what was," one said, "but even shadows prove that light still exists." They buried their weapons and lifted their hearts. In a small clearing, a Pomo woman planted an acorn. Around her the land was barren, but she smiled. "My grandmother planted one too," she said. "Now it is my turn." Her hands trembled. But her spirit did not. From that single act, life began again. Settlers built ranches over graves, but the tribes whispered from beneath the soil. "We are here," they said. "You cannot build over memory." The Yuki and Namlaki began teaching their children secret songs. In those melodies lay the truth, a history the world tried to bury but could never silence. Courtrooms barred Indigenous voices, testimonies dismissed, justice denied. Chief Lassic's widow sat outside one such courthouse holding her son's hand. "One day," she said, "they will have to hear us." Her words did not reach the judges, but they reached the sky, and the sky remembered. The valleys where Miwok children once played now grew over with weeds. The laughter was gone, but the air still felt thick with memory. A hoopa girl, alone among ruins, plucked wild berries and smiled faintly. "You lived here?" she whispered to the wind. "I can feel you still." Mission bells rang, promising salvation, but none came. Churches blessed the settlers' conquests, baptizing genocide as destiny. The Karuk elders prayed not in churches, but under trees. "The earth is our altar," they said, "and the rain is our blessing." Their prayers rose like mist, unseen but eternal. On sprawling ranches, native men toiled under the sun, digging, hauling, breaking. Children watched fathers collapse at dusk. Chief Augustine, now gray-haired, stood by the lake again. "They enslaved us," he said quietly, "but they never owned us." The ripples answered in gold light, whispering his name back in defiance. Mining towns glowed with wealth and noise, but at their edge lay silence, burial grounds for those who made that gold possible. A Yokut's elder stood at the border of a mine and said, "The earth has paid enough." Her words vanished in the clamor of picks and laughter, but the mountain heard. The Toloa rowed their canoes by moonlight, singing the songs of ancestors. They sang softly, for their villages were gone, but their spirits not. "If they burn the shore," an elder said, "we will build homes on the waves." The ocean swelled gently, its tide an oath of remembrance. Under the blazing sun, Maidu laborers worked land that once belonged to them. Sweat streaked their faces, but their eyes burned with defiance. Chief Lame Bill, now frail, watched from afar. "Let them take what they want," he said. The land still knows our names. In a settler's journal, delivered one Indian laborer. Such words disguised horror. A young Pomo woman scrubbed floors and whispered to herself, "They can write their books, but our stories will outlive them." She smiled faintly, imagining the ancestors walking beside her unseen. Deep in the redwoods, Chief Waki Jack knelt before the roots of an ancient tree. "You saw it all," he said. "Do not forget us." The forest rustled softly, a promise between spirits. He closed his eyes and felt peace, for memory itself had taken up his cause. In 1871, a small Yahi family was massacred at Kingsley Cave, one of the last echoes of genocide. The cave walls still bear their smoke. Even the silence feels alive there, whispering sorrow. "They thought they ended us," said a descendant years later. "But every echo is still our voice. Those who endured built new villages from ashes. They sang the old songs, taught the forbidden dances. The Esalen carved memory into stone, prayers in a language the world tried to erase. If they bury our tongues," they said, "the earth will speak for us." Highways and towns were built atop unmarked graves. Children played, unaware of the bones beneath. A Maidu elder wandered those roads, leaving small stones in silence. "So they will know," she said, "that this ground still belongs to someone." Chief Augustine returned one final time to Clear Lake, now older and alone. The water shimmered under the sun, hiding ghosts below. He knelt and whispered, "I am still here." The lake rippled in reply, calm, eternal, forgiving. The descendants of the Yuki, Pomo, and Wintu began telling their stories again. In every classroom, in every gathering, they spoke the names once forbidden. "We are the children of survivors," one girl said proudly, "and this land still knows us." For decades, history books called it conflict, not genocide. But truth has a way of resurfacing. Scholars began to write, to uncover, to confess. And the tribes nodded quietly, not in forgiveness, but in recognition. Finally, the silence was broken. The weight of loss became a legacy of strength. Settlers built monuments to themselves, but the tribes built memory, invisible, unbreakable. For every name erased, a story returned. For every life lost, a generation remembered. The spirit endured. Centuries later, historians finally called it what it was: genocide. The word burned, but it healed too. The Maidu, Pomo, and Karuk stood tall once more, not as relics, but as nations reborn. The truth, once denied, became a torch. Descendants gathered where the blood once fell. Sage smoke rose into the sky. Children danced. Elders prayed. The river hummed softly beside them. "We forgive the land," one said, "but not the forgetting." Their tears fell, not from pain, but from release. The wind over California now carries more than history. It carries voices. Every breeze through redwoods, every wave on the coast, every rustle of oak, all whisper, "We are still here." The land itself sings in their memory. New generations plant the same acorns their ancestors once did. Schools rise on old village grounds, but now the stories return. "Every seed," said a young Pomo boy, "is a promise that will never be erased again." Between 1846 and 1873, over 16,000 Indigenous Californians were killed. Thousands more enslaved. Yet their spirit outlasted the empire that tried to erase them. Their blood became the roots of California itself, unacknowledged but unbroken. Chief Augustine, Chief Lame Bill, Chief Waki Jack, Chief Lassic. Names once whispered in fear are now spoken in reverence. They did not fight for revenge. They fought for memory, for land, for love. Their legacy is written not in ink, but in endurance. Today, the land breathes with both sorrow and rebirth. Native communities revive their languages, reclaim traditions, and honor their ancestors. California's soil still holds their stories, and in every sunrise, the spirits rise too. History is not distant. It is beneath our feet. The California Gen. If this story moved your heart, don't let their voices fade into silence. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Then turn on the notification bell so you never miss more powerful Native American stories. Together, we remember, and we rise.